rain. Instead, it was a
We hate to break away from this, but we take you very quickly back to New York. In just about 20 seconds or so, you're going to hear the reading of the names stop of the victims and the bells ring to mark the exact time the South Tower began to collapse and horrific cascade of concrete and smoke.
Leo Russell Keene III. Joseph John Keller. Peter R. Kellerman. Joseph P. Collette. Frederick H. Kelly, Jr.
My name is Brittany Clark. My father Keith was a chef on the 96th floor of the World Trade Center. This poem makes me feel like my daddy is speaking to me. I give you this one to keep. I am with you still, I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on the snow. I am the sunlight on ripening grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in morning's hush, I am the uplifting rush of quiet birds in circled flight. I am the soft stars that shine at night. Do not think of me as gone. I am with you still in each new dawn.
Brittany's father died when the South Tower collapsed. It was in that moment, for me, I suspect for many of you, when the magnitude of this tragedy became so apparent that buildings were coming down, and these names you are listening to, that these numbers would be in the thousands.
Maurice P. Kelly.
Thomas Michael.
And of course, what we didn't know at that time, that the North Tower, too, would ultimately go.
Timothy Colin Kelly.
Well, I'll say this, that when that first tower came down,
Thomas J.
standing up there, I think there was a sense that it was only a matter of time.
Ralph Kershaw.
It's, as we listen to this, these 2,800 names,
Douglas D.
there is in some way
Ruth Ellen.
a sense we have of how much worse it might have been, how blessed we are
Rajesh
that
Khandelwal.
we are talking about 2,800 and not tens of thousands. And believe me, that could have happened. Very easily could have happened.
Kichuchihara.
50,000 people were in those buildings. So in our grief, we also understand that we were somewhat fortunate on that awful day.
And it is true, had those planes hit anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour later, the toll would have been much bigger.
Bradshaw.
In any case, it is
Wanda A. Green. C.C. Lyles. Deborah Ann Jacobs Welsh. Christian Adams. Todd Beamer. Alan Bevin. Mark Bingham.
Shanksville, and the bell will ring for each of the 40
Bodley.
passengers who died. the heroes of Flight 93.
Marion Britton.
And who knows what they saved us from? We may never know exactly.
Thomas E. Burnett Jr.
But we do know that they gave their lives in a historic struggle.
William
And we thank them.
Cashman. Georgine Rose Corrigan. Patricia Cushing. Joseph DeLuca. Patrick Joe Driscoll. Edward Porter Felt. Jane C. Folger. Colleen L. Fraser. Andrew Garcia. Jeremy Glick. Lauren Grancolas. Donald F. Green. Linda Gronlund.
Our own Carolyn is standing by as we honor the two pilots. Actually, the president is just about ready to get underway. Let's go back to the Pentagon.
One year ago, men and women and children were killed here because they were Americans. And because this place is a symbol to the world of our country's might and resolve. Today we remember each life. We rededicate this proud symbol, and we renew our commitment to win the war that began here. Terrorists chose this target hoping to demoralize our country. They failed. Within minutes, brave men and women were rescuing their comrades. Within hours, in this building, the planning began for a military response. Within weeks, commands went forth from this place to enter terrorist camps and caves and liberate a nation, and within 1 year, this great building has been made whole once again. Many civilian and military personnel have now returned to offices they occupied before the attack. The Pentagon is a working building, not a memorial. Yet the memories of a great tragedy linger here. And for all who knew loss here, life is not the same. The 184 whose lives were taken in this place, veterans and recruits, soldiers and civilians, husbands and wives, parents and children, left behind family and friends whose loss cannot be weighed. The murder of innocents cannot be explained, only endured. And though they died in tragedy, they did not die in vain. Their loss has moved a nation to action in a cause to defend other innocent lives across the world. This war is waged on many fronts. We've captured more than 2,000 terrorists. A larger number of killers have met their end in combat. We've seized millions in terrorist assets. We're reorganizing the federal government to protect the homeland. Yet there's a great deal left to do. And the greatest tasks and the greatest dangers will fall to the armed forces of the United States. I came to the presidency with respect for all who wear America's uniform. Every day, as your Commander-in-Chief, my respect and that of our nation has deepened. I have great confidence in every man and woman who wears the uniform of the United States of America. I am proud of all who have fought on my orders, and this nation honors all who died in our cause. Wherever our military is sent in the world, you bring hope and justice and promise of a better day. You are worthy of the traditions you represent, the uniform you wear, the ideals you serve. America is counting on you, and our confidence is well placed. What happened to our nation on a September day set in motion the first great struggle of a new century. The enemies who struck us are determined, and they're resourceful. They will not be stopped by a sense of decency or a hint of conscience, but they will be stopped. A greater force is amassed against them. They are opposed by freedom-loving people in many lands. They are opposed by our allies who have fought bravely by our side. And as long as terrorists and dictators plot against our lives and our liberty, they will be opposed by the United States Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Air Force, and Marines. We fight as Americans have always fought, not just for ourselves, but for the security of our friends and for peace in the world. We fight for the dignity of life against fanatics who feel no shame in murder. We fight to protect the innocent so that the lawless and the merciless will not inherit the earth. At every turn of this war, we will always remember how it began and who fell first. The thousands who went to work, boarded a plane, or reported to their post. Today, the nation pays our respects to them. Here, and in Pennsylvania, and in New York, we honor each name and each life. We ask God to bring comfort to every home where they are loved and missed. And on this day, And on every day, may He watch over the United States of America. God bless.
President, in his talk to the Pentagon, a thank you, a vote of confidence,
Ladies
and
and
a prayer
gentlemen,
for peace in all those homes
delivered by
that have been lessened by the events of a year ago.
Let us pray. Eternal Lord God, who has given us this good land, help us never to forget our September 11th wake-up call. Lord, you awakened us to a deeper appreciation of freedom's high cost. You awakened us to see the heroism in ordinary Americans who face the horrific with courage conceived in faith's womb. You awakened us to rededicating our lives to making the American dream more than rhetoric, but reality. Lord, forgive us when we have failed to transform our creeds into our deeds. Help us to be up and doing for liberty's cause. May Todd Beamer's words, "Let's roll," illuminate the path ahead. Lord, let us roll toward bringing hope and healing in the midst of despair and hope. Let us roll toward bringing unity where we find division. Let us roll toward bringing your peace on earth. In the days to come, Lord, challenge us when our dreams come true because they are too small. Challenge us when we forget that righteousness brings favor and that truth crushed to earth will rise again. Challenge us, Lord, when we arrive safely simply because we have sailed too close to the shore. Make us indeed one indivisible nation, sustained by your loving providence, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with love. God bless America, sweet home. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in singing God Bless America. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, where it flows.
The messages we've heard this morning have been fairly consistent, from Chaplain Barry back, challenging us all to come together as we watch this flyover over the Pentagon. For us all to have a greater sense of gratitude for what's good in our lives. The President imploring all of us to remember each of those who lost their lives at the Pentagon, but at Ground Zero and Shanksville, and renew our commitment to, he says, the war that began here.
As the ceremony at the Pentagon was going on here in New York, the reading of the names continued, and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, that is Governor Tom Ridge, now Director of Homeland Security, and Carol Lynn is there also for us.
Did not know.
Aaron, right now the Homeland Security Director, who was then Governor of Pennsylvania, is talking directly to the family members here and talking about the sacrifice that their loved ones made that day on Flight 93. Let's listen in.
The war would last 4 more months or 40 more years. And we do not know how long it will take to defeat the scourge of terrorism, or how many Americans will give their lives for the cause. But we do know one thing with absolute certainty. The passengers and crew of Flight 93 won the first battle. Sandy Dahl said that adversity does not build character. Adversity reveals character. She's absolutely right. And these 40 amazing, extraordinary people had character in abundance. Everyday heroes, you might ask? No. They were heroes every single day. These were men and women who were well practiced in the art of making a difference. Whether it was restoring a shelter for battered women, volunteering at a crisis pregnancy center, tutoring elementary school children, becoming an activist for the disabled, or planning humanitarian sabbatical to India. One crew member even used to save leftover airline meals to feed the needy. Heroes every single day, because they brought love and joy to so many. And as a spouse and a father myself, I can only imagine the pain their deaths have caused you. A pain that will be relived not just every anniversary, but every single day. But today is not just to mark their tragic and their honorable deaths. Today is also to celebrate their lives and to express a nation's gratitude for their actions. In their final moments, our 40 brave heroes' thoughts were with their family and their friends. Your love sustained them. Your support and love gave them the courage to act. I hope you can imagine that love and that support may have even put a smile on their face for a moment or two. And you were in their hearts as they entered heaven. Today we also honor and thank a community. The people of Shanksville and Somerset County embrace the families of Flight 93 as their own.
There you're seeing some of the family, some 500 family and friends of the passengers of Flight 93 listening to Governor Ridge as he addresses the very personal loss that they took 1 year ago today.
This sleepy little town just puts its arms around you and embraces you. This is a community, ladies and gentlemen, that appreciates and accepts its historical legacy. You just ask those Flight 93 ambassadors who volunteer to answer every visitor's
Governor Ridge just wrapping up his remarks here as he speaks to many of the first responders who arrived here hoping to make it a rescue operation but not finding anyone to rescue. And the family members down below, I would say half of them, this is the first time that they've been to the crash site. A very emotional experience, but what family members are telling me is that it's been an uplifting one, that this is an important anniversary for them in the sense that it gives them the opportunity to not only be here to see the reality of the crash site, but also to have a sense of moving on. It has been a touching ceremony. We heard earlier from Sandy Dahl, the wife of the captain of Flight 93, who talked about looking forward, about the fallen angels, and about how it is time to look forward. Paula, Aaron?
Well, we can't know all the details of what went on that airplane, but we know enough to know how heroic they all were, because surely they knew. They knew that that plane was headed for trouble, and they knew that they would die on it, and they did what they had to do.
And while we're reminded of the great sorrow in Shanksville, we return to New York, where Secretary Powell now is reading the names of those lost at Ground Zero.
Ferdinand B. Marone, William David Bosco, Marco Motroni, Cynthia Otis Wilson, Yori A. Mushinsky, Jude Joseph Musa, Peter Mutos, Damian O'Neill Mawat, Christopher Mozio, Stephen Vincent Mulderry, Richard Muldowney Jr., Michael D. Mullen, Dennis Michael Mulligan, Peter James Mulligan, Michael Joseph Mullen, James Donald Munhall, Nancy Muniz, Carlos Munoz, Frank Munoz, Teresa Munson, Robert M. Marak, Cesar Augusto Murillo, Mark A. Marullo, James F. Murphy IV, Brian Joseph Murphy, Charles Anthony Murphy,
Christopher W. Murphy,
Edward Charles Murphy,
James Thomas Murphy,
Robert Eddie Murphy Jr.,
Kevin James Murphy,
Patrick C. Murphy,
Raymond E. Murphy,
John Joseph Murray,
John Joseph Murray Jr.,
Susan D. Murray,
Valerie Victoria Murray,
Richard Todd Meyer,
Robert B. Nagel,
Mildred Naaman.
The President has now left the Pentagon. Marine One making its way. The reading of the names, which has now gone on,
Ladies and
help me here, but about an hour and a half.
Yeah, a little shade over that.
And we are at the middle of the alphabet now, the N's. You know, we've all talked so often about trying to get our arms around these numbers, 2,800 names. You get a sense of how big it is by how long it takes to read them all.
And then, of course, we're coming up on the moment everyone dreaded and you feared after you reported on the collapse of the first tower a year ago. In just about a minute or so from now, you will hear church bells peal all over New York City, and you'll see an observance of the exact moment at which the North Tower, the second tower, collapsed a year ago today.
We said a couple of hours ago that these next few hours They're going to be difficult hours for all of us, all of you. They have lived up to that sad promise.
Lucille Newell. Kapinga Nagua. Jody Niccolo.
Firehouses and churches and street corners. All things stopped for a moment. A year later, and now both towers have come down.
We are told that a majority of Americans will find sometime today from prayer, whether it's in a mosque, in a synagogue, or in a church. And seems like this repeated throughout the country. We can't show you all of the ceremonies that are going on across the land, but the same sense of sorrow and same sense of honor and dignity that you're seeing expressed here today will be repeated all over the country today.
It's a firehouse over in Brooklyn. We spent some time. We wondered, they took a terrible loss on the 11th. Wonder how they're doing today. Well, they'll remember this day a year later. Bill Hemmer has been at Ground Zero this morning, taking this all in as you have, Bill.
Yeah. What a morning, Aaron. I have a what amounts to essentially a phone book of names in front of me here. By my count, about 150 pages in out of 197, so a little bit pretty close to 2/3 of the way through the reading of these names. You can see a few patterns also down in the pit area of Ground Zero. A substantial number of families who work their way down into the area find themselves around what used to be a metal cylinder, essentially, where they place these flowers, roses and sunflowers, and all these smart people who have made their way to another location in the pit area as well. That location is where the South Tower was located, the other being where the North Tower approximately located here a year ago. In the North Tower, 1,400 people perished. In the South Tower, 600. The other thing we're picking up on down here, and I'm sure you've seen it in our coverage, is the purple and white Hawaiian that a number of people have been wearing and also placing in and around that ring. We are told that the state government of Hawaii had those flown in for these families today, giving them the option as to whether or not they wanted to wear them, to use them, to place them down in the area known as the pit. And for those I think, who look to higher symbols and higher signals that we try and interpret as we go through our daily lives here. And certainly this day is holding so many images by the hundreds, literally every 15 minutes as you look around this area down here. Two moments in the past 2 hours that really struck me. At about 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, the sunlight started to break through the lower Manhattan skyline, and the rays of the sun literally pierced the morning sky and hit directly upon the location where the North Tower is located. And about 20 minutes later, at the beginning of the reading of this long list of names, the first gust of wind we felt started kicking up, and a lot of people looked around and wondered if there were other people talking to us here down. And today, it is an extremely windy day, and as you can see, the dust kicking up down in Ground Zero and literally coating the family members who make their way down there. It's been almost hours, 1 hour and 50 minutes for the reading of these names. We were told it may take as long as 3 hours, and that process continues now. Aaron?
We talk about the footprints of the buildings where the buildings once stood. For these family members, so many of them, there has been no remains. There has been nothing to bury. And so they come here because this is their place. This is where their loved ones will rest for eternity.
Aaron, we have seen so many funerals in New York City taking place last fall, but this again today appears to be the biggest public wake we have seen in our nation's history. 1,700 families have received no remains. And of those people, 3,000 children lost a mother or a father a year ago today. Aaron.
Robert Harrell. Diane Marie Parsons.
I guess, Aaron, when you think about the families who have returned to this very painful site, you could just start to try to understand why the debate is as fierce as it is as to what should happen here. The former mayor of the city saying this should absolutely, all 16 acres of it, be a memorial site. There are family members I've spoken with that say absolutely there should be something there to acknowledge the honor and dignity of those that were lost, but at the same time, some of the family members really want commerce to return to this very small chunk of land in the city.
Well, I think, having spent a bit of time on it over the last month, in a very slow way, very slow, consensus is building, not on the specifics of what it would look like. That's honestly, certainly where a memorial is concerned, years away before we see the designs that are the final designs, but a sense of the balance, that there must be at what was a center of commerce, some commerce, and there must be at what was the center of this tragedy a grand and important American memorial, and that those two seemingly ideas have to somehow live in peace together. And that's what the design teams are struggling so hard, and they haven't hit it yet. And there's no one involved in the process who believes they've hit it yet. So they went to the drawing board, and they're trying again to come up with the perfect compromise. Compromise is rarely perfect. If ever there was a time for one, it strikes me this is it.
But these families will be very involved in the process, and just this week it became abundantly clear that some feel strongly enough that they don't even want the subway system to go anywhere near underground where the footprints of either one of those buildings were. And as you say, there's no such thing as a perfect consensus, but they're going to have tears shed in this process as the city works towards a compromise.
And it is, it's a very complicated piece of land because it is in the city, but it is under the auspices. It is technically owned by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. There is something called the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, which is charged with designing, we saw Senator Schumer there briefly, I believe, which is charged with essentially running the process of reaching consensus, and that represents the Port Authority and the governors of New Jersey and New York, City of New York, the mayor. The family members have a representative there. But even the family members, Paula, as you just noted, are not all of the same mind as to how best to memorialize those 16 acres.
What is clear, though, it seems the suggests that city leaders take very seriously the input of the families and value what they're saying as conflicting as some of their opinions are.
Our friend Paul Goldberger, who writes about architecture for New York Magazine, made the difficult point the other day that we must always be respectful of the family's wishes. But we also must understand, he said, that this is an American place. This is a place that belongs to the city and to the country and to history, and that there are many important constituencies that have legitimate voices in how we memorialize the 16 acres. It is a complicated and difficult process. Just consider that it took us 20 years to find the exact right way to remember the 58,000 men and women who died in Vietnam. 20 years. And we are just a year out here.
And as Americans try to heal their broken hearts today, we're reminded that we've awakened a year later to a strikingly different world than we awakened to last year this time. For the first time since 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. We find that armed missile launchers will protect the nation's capital today. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld making the decision yesterday to arm the portable missile launchers. We also find that we are living at the second highest state of alert today, the orange. Now, in addition to this, CNN has learned this morning that a Liberian-flagged freighter was ordered out of the port of Newark, New Jersey, after an inspection team looking for stowaways. It's quite different than that. Let's turn to Jean Meserve, who's going to bring us up to date on this breaking story. Good morning, Jean.
Good morning, Paula. That Liberian flag tanker being detained 6 miles offshore, a Coast Guard team on board. Let me tell you what we know about this situation. First of all, the FBI, a spokesman in New Jersey, says there is no reason for concern about this. But Tuesday morning at about 2 a.m., a Coast Guard, a Liberian flagged vessel, they were looking for stowaways, and they heard some noises in several of the cargo holds, which made them suspicious that that was exactly what they were dealing with. And so they ordered the ship to come into the port of Newark for further inspection. They took a closer look. They did not find stowaways, but they did do some testing. And this is where the stories diverge. According to some government sources here in Washington, some of them have been positive for radiation. According to other sources, those tests were inconclusive. In any event, out of an abundance of concern given the significance of the date, the ship was taken back offshore. It is being held there 6 miles offshore. Coast Guard on board. Also, the crew on board, they are being detained there for the time being. It is our understanding from some sources here in Washington that a Department of Energy team has been dispatched and will be doing further testing on the vessel so they can correctly determine exactly what it is they're dealing with. There are a couple of possible scenarios here. One is that there could be some nuclear substance on board. This would be a worst-case scenario that experts in the field have feared for some time. It could be naturally occurring radiation. We are told of an incident a couple of months ago where a ship came for some positive tests for radiation. It turns out it was a drill bit that had been dealing that had some radioactive residue on it. The third possibility, we're told, is that cargo containers are reused, and it is possible that there is a container or containers on this ship which were previously used to ship something that was radioactive, and that those containers contain some trace of the radiation. Once again, the FBI in New Jersey saying there is no reason for concern. The spokesman there saying this is not unusual, but given the fact that we are on the orange threat level as of yesterday, given the importance of the day, given the location, the port of Newark, they decided out of an abundance of caution to take this ship further offshore to make a determination of exactly what it is they are dealing with.
Jean, before we let you go, they've, what, a security zone around the ship now?
That's our understanding. Yes, they have created a zone around the ship, kept the crew on board, isolated to keep it somewhere where if they are dealing with a hazardous situation, it will do a minimum amount of damage. But once again, we do not know exactly what it is we're dealing with at this juncture.
All right, Gene Mazurek, let's turn to more information now. David, you heard Gene's report. That's getting information from her sources. Some say radiation was found. Other sources saying it's inclusive. What have you heard?
I can't add anything to this report about the ship, but I can tell you about why more about why the nation is on such a high state of alert. CNN, more than one source, that the key al-Qaeda who led to this heightened state of alert, his information more than any others, is Omar al-Farouk, who was a Kuwaiti national. He was arrested in Indonesia about 2 months ago, was turned over to the United States. He's in U.S. custody, but not in the United States, and I'm told also not in Guantanamo Bay. He, in the last few days, has to talk and give useful information, U.S. officials say, including very specific information about plots to attack various American targets, U.S. facilities in Southeast Asia. So more than any other source, it is this Omar al-Farouk who is, it is information from him that has caused the United States to go. Although officials stress there's also other intelligence suggesting, for example, that there could be suicides against targets in the Middle East, and also a general kind of a chatter, Paula, among al-Qaeda supporters that they might like to commemorate this day in a more negative way than the United States is doing today.
As you no doubt know, the government is very cautious when it decides to go public with these alerts because they don't want to cause unnecessary sense of panic or fear in them. And yet Americans are in some way becoming inured to these warnings. What is it the average American is supposed to do today, particularly as we reach this very important one-year marker?
You know, the government, on the one hand, doesn't want to be accused of not having warned people if something happened. They do have this intelligence, which has caused a great deal of concern, certainly in the U.S. intelligence community. On the other hand, as you say, they want Americans to panic. There's no sense so far that many have. You heard the Attorney General yesterday saying that what's important is that Americans go ahead and commemorate this important day and go about their day business and continue with life as normal while being on a state of alert in the sense that if they see something suspicious that leads them to think there could be some kind of terrorism plotted, they certainly let the authorities know very quickly. Paul?
David, thanks so much. I guess, Aaron, when I woke up this morning, I was reviewing some research, and I was reminded of the fact that although this is the first time the nation has reached this level of orange, the second highest state of alert, the city of New York has in fact been in that range for at least the last 4 months.
So we have, just to keep our apples and our oranges in the same basket, we've got this ship off on the harbor, about 6 miles off in the harbor. They're checking it for radiation. It gives you a sense of just where people are, how nervous everyone is today. There's no absolute evidence, and in fact there are traces of radiation all over us. So, you know, we all know how we react to that word, but we need to make sure that the context is appropriate. The Coast Guard's men and women on board, a team from the Energy Department, which would be the logical testers in this, are en route, and in an abundance of caution, the ship that you see and registered is being held 6 miles offshore, and everybody is safe and well until we know more about it. And then there is the state of alert generally. Now I think Aspen Iran. Carol Lynn, I also believe, is where she belongs, which is in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Carol, I gather the ceremony there is moving towards its conclusion. Am I right?
They were looking forward to today's ceremony, but some of them were also dreading it. They weren't quite sure what it was going to feel like to be here. About half of the families who attended it had actually never visited the site before, so this is the first time that they've not only been here at the site, but also had to brace themselves for what they knew was going to be a very intimate and a very personal ceremony. It just wrapped up, and several thousand of them are now coming up to the memorial site. It's a temporary memorial wall where the public, as well as many of the families, can leave personal messages and even personal tokens, almost gifts to the 40 passenger members who crashed behind me just 1 year ago today. It was a very personal ceremony. That we heard words from Sandy Dahl, who is the wife of the captain, Captain Jason Dahl. She talked about the selfless sacrifice that those passengers made. Yesterday was Tom Ridge, the Homeland Security Director, who was then governor of Pennsylvania, and he quoted Abraham Lincoln talking directly to the family members and addressing their solemn occasion, that the pride that they can take in enduring this ultimate sacrifice that they made. He talked about the ordinary men and women who were simply on their way to vacation or on their way to work, who found themselves in an extraordinary situation. And he called it that in Tom Ridge's mind there is no doubt that several of the passengers as well as the crew members did rush the cabin, and that they were responsible for making sure that that flight did not crash into a populated area, the ultimate sacrifice. Aaron, as you've been talking about this morning, nobody really knows exactly what happened on that flight. They're gathering that information from cell phone calls, from Mark Burnett and Todd Beamer, who were talking about passengers making a plan. Sandy Bradshaw, who was one of the flight attendants, who called her husband on her cell phone saying that she was secretly boiling water in order to attack the hijackers. All anecdotal evidence, but Tom Ridge saying there is no doubt that these people on board Flight 93 saved hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. Aaron?
Well, that's it. I mean, we may never know, and we probably won't ever know precisely how they did it. We mentioned earlier, Jerry Longman of the New York Times had a fascinating account that he pieced together, that they used the food cart to break down the cockpit door. Maybe that happened. We don't know. But we know the truth, which is they took over that airplane, and they did so knowing how they would end their lives, and knowing surely at that point that they were also saving hundreds, if not thousands, of others. So in Shanksville and in New York, Carol, thank you, and in Washington now, these ceremonies marking this day have started to wind down. They continue to read the names in New York City. The president has left the Pentagon and he's back to the White House. He'll be coming here to New York shortly, and to Shanksville as well. We have moved through that first part of this day, that part of the day that is, at least for me, as I thought about it, the most difficult, painful part of the day, and we have started to move through that.
Well, I think a lot of Americans really weren't quite sure if they wanted to relive some of those painful emotions they worked through this time last year, and for both of us.
Yeah, I don't blame them.
It has been pure torture to look at the close-ups of the family members still mourning their great losses. You brought up the strength of the on board Flight 93, and I'm reminded of a conversation I had with Lisa Beamer just last week, where she was saying it wasn't until she had a conversation with one of the 911 operators that she was convinced President on the way to his next stop as he leaves the Pentagon ceremonies. He will later today be heading to Shanksville, Pennsylvania, then to New York, spending a little time at Ground Zero and other places in the city. But what Lisa Beamer said was she felt a sense of anger at her husband Todd that he hadn't picked up the phone to call her. It wasn't until many weeks later that she learned what Alan had done was call a 911 operator to tell her what was going on inside that plane, and I guess the one phrase that everybody has let roll. That's the last thing the operator heard as that phone went to the ground, and that apparently was the point at which these passengers started to storm the airplane.
Somebody will, because there are a lot of people who know a whole lot more than I. This is not Air Force One as we know it, and I assume that has to do with the length of the runway that they're landing in and around Shanksville, that they're bringing a smaller plane in. And if I'm wrong, that's my guess, and that's why it's not a big 747 that you're accustomed to see the president travel in.
That's pretty big to most of us. We're used to traveling on smaller planes. We are going to return to Ground Zero and check in with Gary Tuchman, who I have very vivid memory of reporting in the beginning hours of the crisis. Gary joined us from not far from Ground Zero, not far from the St. Paul's Church, where so many people have gone from time to time to pray and reflect. Gary had to talk with any family members either as they've gone into the ceremony today or as they're leaving.
It was something else, Paula, standing here on Church Street, which is the easternmost border of Ground Zero, and watching the family members walk into the site, tears in their eyes, and it just brought me back to a few months ago when we were here for the first memorial service at the site. The sorrow never goes away. But we come here to the vantage point that we were first arrived at several hours after this happened on September 11, 2001. It's now the vantage point for thousands of people from all over the world who have come here just to stand, to pay their respects. They've been standing here while the names have been read for the last 2 hours now. They can't see very much from here, but most of these people just want to be here. Like this couple standing right next to me. Your name, sir?
Jim Mazurek from North.
And your name?
Edie Mazurek.
And you are from where?
Northbrook, Illinois.
Northbrook, Illinois, suburb of Chicago. Yes. Did you come to New York to be part of this?
I came to New York to work so that I could be part of this, but I wanted to be here on September 11th.
Tell me what made you decide to stand here to listen to the names, to be part of this ceremony.
I think it's been the most devastating thing that's ever happened in American history. I just wanted to be part of it. To me, it was important.
How has it made you feel, hearing the church bells toll, hearing the names read? I mean, this really gives you an idea of how many people died here, how long it has taken.
Very sad that this is where our world is at, and very frightened to what might still happen. And I just pray to God that there will be peace and that we can find it fairly soon so our children will be safe.
Thank you for talking with us. Standing right next to you are some ladies who've been here also the whole time. Your name, please?
Ann Montoro Williams.
And Ann, where are you?
Scranton, Pennsylvania.
And see you have on your lapel a World Trade Center pin.
Yes, it's a gift, and it's a show of support for New York City, the people who work here and live here and serve the city every day, and to let the people that did this know that we're united and we're not afraid of them.
How has it made you feel standing here being part of the ceremony?
The reasons I came down is one of the names was the name of a brother of a girl I graduated college with. He was a member of the Port Authority Police Department. So when I heard his name, it was especially meaningful.
And thank you very much. One of the things notable, when we got here earlier today, it was completely calm outside. Literally 1 minute after they read the first name, the winds picked up to like 35 miles. You're standing here, notice that. Paula, back to you.
I know Bill Hemmer was reporting a little bit earlier on, Gary, that the one thing that the family members certainly could feel this morning was the rain of dust that was being kicked up by these heavy winds. Thank you. We'll be checking in with you throughout the day. I'm just really struck by the number of people who've come from outside New York City to share in some of the ceremonies today, making business trips here on purpose to share in some of the very, very sad.
Yeah, people have been, as they do in New York, I guess in the summertime, people have been coming all summer long, but they added a new stop on the tour of the great and important places in the city, and that's Ground Zero, and they would come with their cameras and they would sit and they would reflect on it all. We have focused a lot this morning, particularly in the last, that was loud here.
The sounds of commerce.
I guess so. We have focused a lot this morning, understandably, given where we've been so far, on those who perished on the 11th. And so this, in some ways, seems like the rarest of all 9/11 stories. It's a story of a survivor. Before we get to it, I'm going to do this again, but I think it's for the last time, because I think it's the last time we're going to show these pictures today. This piece includes pictures of planes hitting towers and perhaps towers collapsing. We know how sensitive you are to those pictures, and in fact we are as well. We're trying to be very careful in how we use them and where we use them, and in any time we do use them, we'll give you plenty of notice. Understandably, this stuff is very hard to watch. So, having said the long disclaimer, this is the best of all stories we can offer on a day like today. It is the story of someone who made it out alive. Here's CNN's Michael Oku.
Stanley Prameneth and Brian Clark had never seen the World Trade Center site from this vantage point. They are alive to see it because their paths crossed at just the right moment. They're the way everybody else's did.
I normally arrive 7:15 in the morning, 84th floor of the South Tower. I did so that day.
Pick up my raisin bagel and coffee, make my way to the 81st floor. Nothing unusual.
By the time the morning was over, they would owe their lives to each other and would be 2 of only 4 people above the 78th floor in the South Tower who would survive.
There was just this tremendous boom that I heard, and a bit of a shudder, more from a shock wave than anything else. And I spun around, and where I normally see the Hudson River and the World Financial Center below me was nothing but a fireball, like right against my glass. Just complete flames swirling.
3 floors below, Premnath, the loan officer with Fuji Bank, was with a co-worker.
We ran down the hall from the south end of the South Tower, took the elevator. We went down the ground floor. The security guard asked us, "Where you guys are going?" "I was coming down. I'm getting out of here." "No, your building is secured. It is safe." Eventually, I got back in that elevator.
On the 84th floor, Clark heard the all-clear on the PA system as he consoled a female co-worker who had been watching people jump off the North Tower.
And I walked her out of our east trading floor, and I really do think it's that walk, Susan to me and me walking her to the ladies' room all the way over to the west side of the tower, that probably saved my life.
In minutes, the second plane would fly into view, careening the southeastern section of the South Tower.
I just happened to raise my head, watching toward the Statue of Liberty. And as I watched, I saw this giant aircraft, big gray plane. It's coming in slow motion towards me, eye level, eye contact. And I just froze.
Again, Premnath was on the 81st floor, Clark on the 84th. The plane would plow through floors between 78 and 84 before exploding.
There was this concussion, and our walls, ripped at odd angles. Door frames fell to the wall. The ceiling just collapsed. Speakers, lighting, cables, air conditioning ducts. The ceiling just emptied, if you like. The building just swayed one way and just kept going. Yards. When's it going to stop? Further. And then it finally stopped.
And I'm shuddering, and I'm trembling, and I'm crying. Lord, don't leave me to die. And I realize I'm covered with debris when I try to get up. Peeking through the rubble, and all I could see was the plane wing wedged at my office door 20 feet from where I was.
What looked like the wing could have been the tail. In any case, Premnath remembers watching it glow. At the 4th floor, where he was a fire warden, Clark grabbed his flashlight. Unaware of the devastation below him, he and 6 other co-workers raced towards the exits. They showed they would have eventually been blocked by debris. By sheer chance, they chose A, the only one that could have led them to safety.
We met a very woman coming from below. Stop. You can't come off a floor in flames, and there's smoke, and we've got to get above it. We've got to climb higher. All of a sudden I heard this banging on the wall, and this voice, strange voice, crying at us somewhere on the 81st floor.
And I'm screaming, "I'm right here. There's a stand on the woman's apartment. Don't leave me to die."
And I clicked on my phone. I had to have my flashlight on, and when I put it on, and then I shone it around the floor.
And I was going to say on the wall, "Knock where you are and I'll know."
When I shone the light a little clearer through the hole where he was, I could see this very animated face through an opening. But there was something immovable between us.
And Brian said, "Jump," and I said, "I can't jump." He said, "If you jump over this wall, I'm going to grab you." And as I jumped, I grabbed, and I held on to this wall.
And I jumped and somehow grabbed onto something under the armpit, I don't know what it was, and pulled this body over the top, and then we fell in a heap on the floor.
Both men had open wounds on their hands.
And Brian took my hand, my right hand, and he held out his left hand, and he rubbed it like this together, and he said, "From today, you're my blood brother."
A little more than 5 minutes had passed since the plane hit. The group Clark had descended the stairwell with had changed direction and retreated to higher floors. Only one of them would survive.
Did you ever debate going back upstairs?
When we got to the stairs, I just turned down. I wanted to test what was below.
The 2 men made a slippery descent down the wet stairs. Occasional cracks in the walls exposed within.
And Brian is telling me, "Take your time, take your time. There's no hurry." And I'm like, "No, we've got to go, we've got to hurry."
4 minutes after getting out, they heard it.
Steel bending and creaking, it made this, I can't explain the sound, but it's like It was an eerie sound.
And we heard this boom, boom, boom.
As the tower collapsed, Stanley Kramer and Ryan Clark were watching from less than 100 yards away, just before they ran. Two of the very last people to get out alive. In New York.
Who can say where the road goes, where the day flows, only time.
New York City, 1 year later, and 1 year ago, at 5 minutes after 11 Eastern Daylight Time, this city was a disaster. A cloud of dust and debris floating over Manhattan where we are. You could start to smell a smell that would linger over the city for some months to come. Welcome back to CNN's coverage of America Remembers 1 year mark on our ground.
And I'm Paula Zahn, alongside Aaron on the rooftop of our New York bureau, the same vantage point. A very different view from 1 year ago. I've made a point of not trying to look over my left shoulder today. I think those of us who live here, and you look back at that skyline, there's something very important missing. There's just a gaping hole in that skyline today.
People talked about this a lot, but New Yorkers in particular, I think, literally would get their bearings where they were in the city by looking towards the towers. And it's been, and all the other things that have been horrible about the year, it's been disconcerting in many ways. Among the things, honestly, that are disconcerting today is the fact that the nation is on an elevated state of alert. Military bases in Afghanistan are on their highest state of alert. The state of alert that occurs if they believe an attack is underway or imminent. It is not the kind of thing that you normally prepare for. To give you some idea of how the troops overseas are dealing with the day, Bob Franken is at the Pentagon, and he's been covering that and more, and so we welcome him into the mix. Bob, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, and as you know, Aaron, there is an A to D security stratification in the military: A, Alpha, B, Bravo, C, Charlie, and D, Delta. Delta is the highest. As you said, it is the designation when there is the prospect of an imminent attack, and the practical effect of it is that the military forces in the various countries that are covered by the Central Command are at their weapons. They are prepared to immediately engage in combat. It is a highly unusual designation. It is something that, in fact, is quite startling because of its severity. The CENTCOM, the Central Command, of course, covers Afghanistan and most of the Middle East, and those countries, of course, are right in the middle of the greatest security fears. Of course, the entire world, including the United States, learned the lesson last September 11th that all places are the danger zones in the world. In addition to that security, there is the military reality that around the country right now, there are now what they call 10 combat air patrol sites. That means that in 10 spots around the United States, airplanes are in the air 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Combat jet aircraft protecting the skies. In addition to which, there are 15 strip alert sites. Those are military bases where the people can scramble and be in their planes and in the air ready for combat in just a few moments. Most military bases in the United States have gone up from the combat readiness of Alpha to Bravo today on September 11th. And of course, that is all part of the concern about September 11th and some intelligence. One of the things I wanted to show you appeared here at the Pentagon as the ceremonies here were going on with the President of the United States. On the roof of the Pentagon, we could see, right now you're seeing missile batteries that surround Washington. These are mobile missile batteries carrying Stinger missiles. It is the first time that there have been armed missiles surrounding Washington, D.C. since the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1960s. In addition to which, what you're looking at now is the rooftop of the Pentagon in back of us. That we saw just a while ago, snipers and observers watching for any problems. Now, part of this is based on information which came from an informant, a Kuwaiti, Omar al-Farouk. According to CNN's David Ensor, intelligence sources are saying this is somebody who has been held by the United States, who has been interrogated for quite some time. Only recently did he give information that was corroborated with information that the interrogators and other intelligence sources have been gaining over the weeks and months. That is what caused everybody to ratchet up the security alert. So the United States, of course, Aaron, is jittery today, but it is a substantive jitteriness, and it is just protection to make sure that there is as little chance as possible that anything could go wrong.
Well, we hope that's exactly what it is, that this is one of those exercises that in the end means nothing. We would just point out, first, anytime the President of the United States is anywhere, there is intense security. There are snipers on rooftops in New York under ordinary circumstances. So just again, it's just a note of context. Thank you, Bob.
Well, as we are enduring 30 to 40-mile gusts of air up here,
you know, I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh about any of this, but you're right there in mid-sentence, and all of a sudden you honestly thought that 24 floors above you were about to go flying.
Yeah.
I wasn't that interested in going flying. Thank you very much.
When Bob was talking about this heightened state of alert we're living in, it should be pointed out that New York, in fact, has been at the orange level for the last several months, and I heard someone say it's as though it's a city with its fingers crossed right now, and no more do you feel that more than when you go down to Ground Zero, which of course was the strategic center of the attacks and a spiritual center of the recovery. Bill Hemmer is standing by down there, who has been covering the morning's memorial service and has seen thousands of people drifting into the site and now away from the site as we're nearing the end of the services. Good morning again, Bill.
Yeah, Paula, by our count, about 100 names left, and one of the readers right now down at the lectern down on West Street literally shouting out the names. Each speaker here given about 14 different victims' names to read out, and it was quite clear that she wanted everyone in Manhattan to hear the names of the victims that she was reading off. One thing we're picking up on, Paula, right now, if we can take our cameras down to West Street, there are literally thousands and thousands of family members that are still awaiting, backed up in an essential backlog, waiting for their opportunity to descend the ramp 7 stories down into the pit area. Now, it was our understanding that the schedule was supposed to be dictated this way. Sometime between 1:30 and 2 o'clock Eastern Time here in New York, this area was expected to be cleared out in order for security clearance to come through to make way for the President later this afternoon. Our senior White House correspondent John King is with me here also at Ground Zero, and days like today, the schedule slides sometimes, doesn't it, John?
The schedule slides, and one of the reasons the President gave such brief remarks at the Pentagon and is scheduled not to speak here at all, but just to visit the site, is because he believes this should be a day for the families. So you can be certain that if they need more time here on the ground, the President would delay his coming. You can also be certain White House personnel, the Secret Service, and others have been on the ground here and at all of the President's stops for several days.
Now, he will make that speech at Ellis Island. One would assume that has a tie-in with immigration and the open arms of the United States welcoming people to this country.
And he wants the Statue of Liberty behind him and in the backdrop as he begins that speech to say that America is the land, a beacon of hope and freedom, and in his view, that's what the terrorists were trying to destroy, and in his view, he will say not only did they fail, but the President will make the case that the terrorists actually, for all the pain they have caused, and you see it down here on the ground behind us, that he has caused a revival, if you will, in this country.
Now, one thing we heard at the Pentagon in that speech, what is about 7 minutes in length as we were sitting here, the intent, we thought anyway, was to talk about the day today for what it meant to the families of the victims. But the message we heard seemed to be more directed toward the current war on terror.
He spent much more time than we had led to be believed that he would, discussing the ongoing war against terrorism, and today is not the day for it. It will be discussed in more detail tomorrow and in the weeks and months ahead. This President is in the middle of a very delicate debate now, even as we go to a higher alert level in the United States, even as the administration concedes Al-Qaeda has scattered like roaches, to use the words of the President's National Security Advisor. This President will make the case tomorrow to the United Nations that perhaps a new front should be opened up confronting Saddam Hussein and Iraq. So there is a policy and a strategy debate that the administration faces. Don't look to discuss that today, and it's not right for us to discuss it much today, but the President is at this very delicate moment of remembering, also at a very delicate moment as he decides how to go forward.
On a personal level, over the past year, I've spent a considerable amount of time down here in and around Ground Zero, going back to the events of last September. I know you've been here before, but as we sit here 10 floors above the street level, this is as close as you have been. I just find it remarkable to look around and see the scene and the images and the people that we are seeing right now.
It is the closest I have come before is the perimeter far away on the other side, and I live within view of the Pentagon. And every night for the past year, you see the workers morning, day, and night fixing the Pentagon. And when you live in a city, as I have almost my entire life, buildings are your landscape, and buildings are your landmarks. And the Pentagon is healed, if you will. When you come here and look down, you remember the day, and you remember that this city has more hurt. That is not to minimize what happened at the Pentagon and the loss to all those families, but the scale of the hurt, and therefore the scale of the healing, is so much bigger here.
There is a giant sign that's hanging at the southern end of Ground Zero behind us, Paula. It says, "The human spirit is not measured by the size of the act, but by the size of the heart." And there's a giant red, white, and blue heart that stands out on the southern skyline of Manhattan that literally towers over the Statue of Liberty, based on the artist's depiction that we see here at the south end of Ground Zero. Back to the President for a moment. This is a very personal issue to him. Oftentimes we have seen him come to a microphone, greet family members, and it's difficult, it appears to me anyway from a distance, for him to hide and hold back his emotions. Do you see that too at the White House?
He is a very emotional president. He tears up whenever he talks about this issue. Aides recall his private meetings, which we have not seen over the course of the past year, including in those early days when he came here to Ground Zero. There was a very memorable moment when he spoke to the rescue workers outside here, but aides say what they saw much more of the inner strength, if you will, of their president was when he met privately with the families here. This will be his first trip to Shanksville. I expect the president to have quite an emotional moment there. He is an emotional person. He is an angry person sometimes. Remember, his language has been criticized on occasion over the past year when he said Osama bin Laden, dead or alive. He is not a poet, but his aides say that when you hear him being blunt or when you see him being moved emotionally, that you are seeing the true George W. Bush.
We will see him today somewhere around 4:30 Eastern Time, which is the anticipated schedule, as I mentioned before, about 5.5 hours from now. Thank you, John. Good to have you here in New York. We'll be back in touch later today. One other note here, Paula. We are literally on the 10th floor in a balcony level of the Merrill Lynch building, part of the World Financial Center here, where John and I are sitting. A year ago at this time, there were 6 feet of debris and dust that the workers had to climb through just to get the doors open to find access to this location here. They have done a remarkable job, truly remarkable in terms of renovation and construction, and throughout the day we'll bring you some images, not only what we saw a year ago, but what they have done since then to reclaim their city of New York. Paula?
Back to the Circle of Honor for a moment, Bill. I know you've spent a lot of time down there, as I have. Just a closing thought about some of the families who haven't had the strength to venture here before, that have walked down that long ramp today to leave, in some cases, personal effects in honor of loved ones they lost.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier this might be the largest public wake in the history of America, and I do not think that's an exaggeration. It is very difficult for the families that come here, and for those who are continue to try this effort to move on. I mean, all they have to do is wake up in the morning, look at that calendar, 9/11. It comes back, and we talked about the wounds being reopened, and for a lot of people, all you can do is really pray and keep your fingers crossed that they're able to heal some of those wounds. Quick story, 2 days ago we were down here surveying the area, trying to figure things out, what they've done since then, and the work they need to do still. And we went up to an officer with the Port Authority, and we asked him to, a few questions, asked him to take us around the perimeter, and he said, not a problem. But at that moment, he was interrupted by a man, maybe 35 years old, who said, I can't come here Wednesday. I lost my mother. Can you take me down in the pit today? And he stopped what he was doing, excused himself from us, and took this gentleman down. It is very, very poignant for the people who have worked here, Paula.
And when you think of the officers that have been down there on duty around the clock, it's quite impressive to see what they've created in some of the mobile units that existed down there, where they had taken things from the site and created their own little shrines. We go back to the ceremony now. It's just interesting to note that it has been going on now for about 2 hours and 25 minutes, the individual reading of the names.
Yao Justin Zhao.
Evelyn Zeminski.
Michael Joseph Zinzi.
Charles A. Zion.
Julie Lynn Zipper.
Salvatore Zisa.
Procopios Paul Zois.
Joseph J. Zucala.
Andrew S. Zucker.
Igor Zuckelman.
Lorraine Antigua.
Frank Thomas Aquilino.
Babita Jajamati Guman.
Dujuan Hodges.
Donna T. Jones.
Donald W. Jones.
Michael F. Lynch.
Vincent S. Morello.
Takashi Ogawa.
May God bless the victims. We love you all. May God bless America.
That long and difficult reading of every victim at the Trade Center. We have tried through the course of the year to give you a sense of magnitude of this. 3 weeks ago, last week in August, they were still finding human remains on buildings in the area of the Trade Center. Funerals literally continue in New York.
Okay, no problem.
Mayor of New York will introduce the governor of New Jersey. The Port Authority, this land that we are talking about, is jointly controlled by both the states of New York and New Jersey, and that's why the governor of New Jersey will make some remarks. He'll read from the Declaration of Independence, but first Mayor Bloomberg.
On which we build our lives. Governor James E. McGreevey.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
A lot of the family members who attended the services downtown New York really didn't know what to expect, and I hope to hear later today that they felt that the integrity of the ceremonies and the dignity of the ceremonies helped them as they go through yet another tough day of successions of very, very painful days since last September 11th.
It is, at least for me, it's hard to imagine that it could have been done any better, any more carefully, any more thoughtfully. There was no speech making. People came and did the appropriate business. As we look at the gathering, there's an honor guard there that's about to be dismissed. About 3 hours now, not quite 3 hours, excuse me, after the ceremony began. It ends, and people will start making their way out of the Ground Zero area and back to their lives. As we've said before, the year mark is an important mark. And it changes in many ways also the tone of our work today. These first hours have been difficult. We've relived the loss of September 11th a year ago. But as we move beyond now 11 o'clock and we're almost at 11:30, there's a lot of other things that we want a lot of other business to do, if you will. We've been working hard, the correspondents at CNN, to try and come to terms with what really happened as it happened over the course of the last year. And so much of what we'll do now as we move through the afternoon is to try and bring you the most comprehensive look at what happened and why as we can in a series of reports. We have heard so often about the fire department here in New York. We hear it talked about as a brotherhood. In some cases, it is also the family business. Fathers and sons, and then their sons become firemen. This is a story of a fire battalion chief who was on the scene, and the brother he saw for the last time in the few minutes before the tower fell. I felt like I just said this, but I'm going to do it again. This piece also includes pictures of planes hitting towers. Please be careful of that, and please, if there are children around, take note of that. We know, believe me, we know how difficult that is. All that said, here again is CNN's Michael O'Connor.
It's 8:46 a.m. Battalion Chief Joe Pfeiffer is on a routine call looking for the origins of a gas leak 12 blocks north of the World Trade Center.
We hear this roar of the plane, and it passes to the west of us and then heads for the Trade Center. I could see the plane steer right into the buildings, and then there was a huge fireball, and a couple seconds later we heard the explosion.
The first fire chief on the scene, Pfeiffer sets up a command post on the ground floor of the North Tower. In the dizzying moments ahead, he will dispatch teams of firefighters up the stairs, closer to the point of impact, including his brother Kevin, a lieutenant with Engine 33.
I thought he was going to be off that day because he was going to study for the captain's test. So he comes up to me at the command post. And he doesn't say a word, and he looks at me, and I tell him where I thought the fire was, and then it was like time just stopped. We stood there for a couple seconds, and just stood there looking at each other.
It was the last time they would ever see each other. Pfeiffer has been reliving that moment and the frenzied aftermath every day since. He's been seeking solace here, 24 miles south of Manhattan, along a stretch of the Atlantic he often sailed with his brother.
It's still 9/11. So I'm hoping for 9/12 to come one of these days.
But the images are still clear. 9:03 a.m.
We hear this loud plane come overhead.
A second plane careening towards the World Trade Center.
And then a loud explosion. And then I remember somebody running in from the outside, almost immediately saying a second plane just hit the South Tower. Well, the sense of urgency was that we had, and we heard it, people jumping.
Chief Pfeiffer and his fellow commanders assemble and conclude the fire cannot be beaten. It is instead a massive rescue mission.
We sent people up with hose lines was to make a rescue path, or our hope was to make a rescue path to get thousands of people out of the building.
9:59 a.m.
Tower 2 collapses. Were you even aware of it?
No, we were in the North Tower. We heard a loud rumbling sound, almost like a freight train coming through. Things were falling into the lobby, and then the entire lobby area where we were went black.
In the blackness, fearful of what happened outside, he barks into his radio.
Command in Tower 1 to all units, evacuate the building. Evacuate the building.
Pfeiffer hears the order being relayed to units on the floors above. A relief since he and the other chiefs have had radio transmission problems all morning. Even as he speaks, pilots in police helicopters above the North Tower are also calling for an evacuation of that building. Pfeiffer and the other firefighters do not hear this.
It would have been far more urgent for everyone to get out.
Miraculously, Pfeiffer and others are carrying the fire department's dead chaplain out of the building just before it collapses.
I remember running maybe 20 yards, and the street starting to turn that brownish color that so many people saw on TV. And I ducked behind a car, and then everything went silent. All the radio traffic stopped. All the noise stopped.
You had to be thinking a little bit about your brother.
I thought of my brother, and I said, well, I'm standing here in a white helmet, and there's tons of firefighters. I said, well, I remember thinking that, well, he'll find me. I'm a little more visible. And I remember at that point walking the site, seeing if I would be able to find them, and or anybody from Engine 33. And I didn't see any helmets with 33 on it.
He knows no walk on the beach will ever erase that memory.
Now, you heard Joseph Pfeiffer say in that piece that he's so looking forward to September 12th because every day since September 11th has been the same. That is clearly the case here at the Chelsea Firehouse. People here, the firefighters, were among the first to respond to the scene a year ago, and they've been desperately trying to move on. They have lost 5 of their members, and it has been very difficult for them to move on. You can see just to my right here, all day people have been stopping by to recognize those people at the at this firehouse who lost their lives, laying down candles, bringing flowers, and some of them contributing American flags. And of course an inscription here reading, "No farewell words were spoken, no time to say goodbye. You were gone before we knew it, and only God knows why." Moments from now, there will be you will be seeing an effort on their part to move on. A flag that has been on top of the firehouse since September 11th of last year has been at half staff. We understand that at some point this morning they will remove this flag and they will replace it with a flag that was given to them by well-wishers at a place called Point Thank You. This is an intersection in Lower Manhattan which for many, many months was as close as residents in New York could get to Ground Zero. They will hoist that flag there at some point this afternoon. Aaron?
Michael, thank you. Michael Oku. It is a perfect example of the law of unintended consequences. New Yorkers, others have come to honor these firefighters, but in doing so, and certainly not intentionally, with the best of intentions, they've made the struggle to move on a little bit more complicated. I think we're all looking forward to September 12th.
We profiled a young firefighter who survived the collapse of the first tower earlier today, and she talked about how sensitive the surviving firefighters are at being called heroes. They were just doing their job that day, and yet I will tell you, as you have visited firehouses as well as I have, those that do the job every day are highly appreciative of the amount of support the nation has shown them and the amount of respect, a new sense of respect for what these people do day in and day out.
Well, there's a reason why all kids at some point in their lives want to be firemen. They get it.
Yeah.
They get it. We all get it better now.
They have all the more reason now to salute them. Right now we're going to head to the Pentagon, where the ceremonies have all but wrapped down after the President spoke and the Defense Secretary. We're joined by Wolf Blitzer to bring us up to date on the heightened state of alert that we all mark this day with, and I believe you have a very special guest as well. Good morning again, Wolf.
Good morning, Paula. Very special guest indeed, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Richard Myers. General, thanks for joining us on this emotional day. I want to get your reflections on what just happened here in just a moment, but on this word that the Central Command, the U.S. forces, mostly in the Middle East, are in this highest state of alert, Delta, as it's called. Give our viewers some perspective, precisely what that means.
Well, it just means a higher state of readiness and who can come in and out of installations and bases and camps and stations, and based on intelligence. And it's, you know, it's something in the last year we've gone up and down in our force protection conditions.
Does it mean the intelligence that a threat is imminent, that there could be a terrorist attack?
Well, it just means we have cause for concern at this time, and when sometimes we do this randomly too, I might add.
The decision to deploy these anti-aircraft missile batteries around Pentagon, elsewhere in Washington, it does underscore some serious threats here in the nation's capital as well.
Well, it's just an extension of our air defense. You know, we have still have fighter caps and fighters on alert to protect American citizens, and this is an extension of that in the ground, for ground systems. And as we look at the threat, that'll go up and down, and we'll, you know, bring forces to bear or take them off alert.
Is it done as an abundance of caution, or is the intelligence such that there are some really, really serious threats out there?
Well, I think it goes without saying there are some really, really serious threats out of there. We saw those on 9/11, and that's what this day is all about.
And there are some current ones as well, I assume.
Yes, you bet.
I know you've been briefed on this Liberian freighter that's out there off the coast of New York. What can you tell us about that?
Some suspicions, some equipment was detected, some radiation, and but then it turned out they're not sure if that was right or not, so they've towed the ship offshore. They'll investigate.
And they're just going to continue to make sure.
That's correct.
Once again, out of an abundance of caution. When you saw this service, this memorial service here at the Pentagon as the nation's top military officer, what was going through your mind?
The first thing is you look in the front rows there where all the families were, families of those that were lost on that day. I mean, a great deal of emotion. As the day progresses, and as I wandered through the crowd after the ceremony, I can't tell you the strength that I derived from their steadfastness, from their resilience. I think it's the American resilience all over their faces, and that's what I thought about. I thought about the personal tragedies that are associated with this day.
And this enormous building behind us has basically been rebuilt. You've spoken to some of the people who used to work at the devastated, destroyed, gone back to their desks.
Right, and that's where we all gathered with the President before we came out. Brand new building. The Pentagon is made whole again. As I said in my remarks, it's not just the cement and the Indiana limestone that's been repaired. It's been our hearts and our souls have been repaired by these great workers here that on their own decided to say, hey, we can get this all done by September 11th.
You spent some time with the President today. Briefly, what was he like?
He was in a very somber mood. I mean, we've all set this day aside to remember those who sacrificed their lives on September 11th, and that's the mood he was in. He was in a serious, somber mood, I think.
Appropriate enough for this day, General Myers?
Yeah, very appropriate. I mean, our hearts go out to those folks who lost their lives and their families. I think it's a really tough day. It's going to be a tough week.
It's a tough day for you. It's a tough day for all the men and women of the U.S. military. It's a tough day for all Americans.
You bet.
People all over the world. Thanks for joining us. Thank you very much, Aaron, from the Pentagon, which was only a little while ago a bus with some 13,000 guests here. The crowd is leaving, and the official services are basically over here, although the memories, of course, continue to linger. Aaron?
It's always, it strikes me as odd how quickly these things end. The last note of the song or whatever is heard, and then you look around and it empties out and it's gone, as if we're supposed to be normal again immediately.
Yeah, they break down the stage, they break down the chairs. This area outside of the Pentagon is going to be almost back to normal within a few hours, and life will go on, and people will get ready for their next mission at the Pentagon behind me. If that next mission involves Iraq, I'm sure they will be ready for that.
Wolf, thank you. Wolf Blitzer at the Pentagon. Just as we approach noon here in the east, to orient you a little bit on where we are, the ceremony, as you just heard at the Pentagon, is now over. The ceremony at Ground Zero here in New York is over. In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the formal ceremony, I guess you could say, has ended too, but certainly not the day there. The President of the United States has landed in the area and is making his way to that field. The President, unless things have changed, I don't believe they have, there's no plan for any formal remarks from the President, but the President does plan to meet with family members of the 40 people who died on the United flight that crashed in Shanksville. Their story well documented. The President will visit them, and then he will make his way to New York. And as we said, the President has landed now in Shanksville and will motorcade to his meeting with the family members, and we'll, as soon as we see the President, we haven't seen him yet, we'll put those pictures up too and get some comments if he makes any public comments, but I don't anticipate that he shall. Again, I think, if I may, just to give some guidance as to where we feel we are in the day, one of the things we want to try and do is give you the best look that we possibly can, that our correspondents can, as to what really happened in roughly the time it really happened. After the planes hit the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, for example, and we're at about that point, we were all struck with this horror of the day. On Flight 93, one of the great stories of this extraordinary tragedy, these acts of courage and determination, I think that's a fair word, that has lived with all of us for the past year. There have been attacks in 2 American cities, New York and in Washington. The trade centers here in New York have been hit by airplanes. In Washington, there is a large fire at the Pentagon. The Pentagon has been evacuated. Obviously, we are in the middle of an extraordinary catastrophe.
It went straight down, and it crashed, and I seen the smoke and the flame come up.
Another plane has crashed, this one about 80 miles south of Pittsburgh.
This is United 93. Flew way out, all the way out toward Ohio, and then took a drastic 180-degree turn, was headed clearly toward Washington, D.C. When the crash happened in Pennsylvania. It's, I think, safe to say, a prominent target in Washington was the goal.
One of the last places you would probably expect to be touched by the violence of an act of terrible terrorism like we have seen today.
What we didn't know at the time was that there were 4 hijackers on board. But what they hadn't counted on was people on board making phone calls to their loved ones and to others. They knew then that they were next, and they decided to do something about it. They got together, they discussed it, and this is what really gets me. They voted. They voted to take back the plane. We walk around to the edge of this ridge area, which is about 300 yards from where the crash site was, and I saw smoke rising up out of what looked like a small pit. I remember asking a state trooper that was there to be sure, is that where the plane went down? It was so hard to tell because there was nothing around. The plane hit so hard that most of the pieces were crumpled in on top of itself, collapsed right there in that crater. I've heard this a number of times, and I think it's very accurate, that Shanksville, Pennsylvania is the site of the first victory in the war on terrorism. These passengers, they fought back, the plane did not make it to Washington, and there's no telling how many lives they saved doing it.
Afternoon. Welcome back to America Remembers and our attempt to share with you events that are going on all over the country today as we mark that 1 year point we've reached after September 11th. About a half an hour ago, the ceremonies wrapped up at Ground Zero, and they perhaps were some of the most poignant for you all to watch. There was a circle of honor where family members trekked down to a very small part of the 16-acre site to pay their respects to family members who had lost their lives. Some family members had never come here before today. It simply was too painful to come, and somehow they thought that they would seek some solace from the shared experience of adventuring there today. It was a very dignified ceremony. A painful ceremony, I'm sure, for all of you to watch, where the individual names of each person murdered here on September 11th a year ago was read. It took almost 2 hours and 40 minutes for dignitaries and family members to get through that list, starting, of course, at the beginning of the alphabet, ending with Z's. Right now, we're going to go to Gary Tuckman, who was one of our first correspondents to get to that area a year ago. He has had time to spend with some of the families there today, trying to reflect with them. And Gary, I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit of what you've experienced so far today.
Well, Paula will be able to do it firsthand, because the fact is, while people all over the world watch this ceremony was especially designed for the family members, those who lost loved ones in the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. And with us right now is one of those family members, or four of the members of the family. This is Pat Racanelli. Pat lost her brother, Vinny Damadeo. The two children, the smallest kids right here, this is 8-year-old Frankie Damadeo. This is 11-year-old Jerry. They lost their dad. And this is James Racanelli. He lost his uncle. I want to ask you, Pat, did this give you comfort being here today?
It did give me comfort. My brother died alone. He was with none of his family. We're a very close family. And I told him that evening, I said, Vinny, you're all by yourself. And all year long that haunted me. So I said, I'm coming here. And I did. And I was scared to, very scared to, because I loved him very much. When I got down into the pit, I felt him. I really did.
Tell me how you felt.
He loved working for Cantor Fitzgerald. He loved the World Trade Center. He's been down here 18 years. I felt his joy. I felt his love of life. His boys were with me. They're talking about their dad. They used to come visit him all the time here. It was very, very comforting. I felt he was with me in a very special way. And I'm thankful for today.
And I want to talk to his boys for a second. Jerry, you're 11 years old in 6th grade. Has 6th grade been tough for you this year without your dad?
Yes.
Tell me what kind of dad your dad was. I bet you he was a great guy, right?
Yes.
Tell me why he was such a great guy.
He always played sports with us.
What sports do you play?
Basketball, soccer, baseball, football.
You must miss him a whole lot.
Yes.
Let me talk to your little brother. This is Frankie. Frankie is in 3rd grade. He just started 3rd grade the other day, right?
Like 3 days ago.
Tell me what kind of guy your dad was.
A nice one.
Yeah, why was he so nice to you?
He used to buy me lots of stuff.
He used to, see, that's what makes a nice dad. It must be hard for you right now. You have your brothers, you have your mom at home, you have your aunt and your uncle, right? What would you say to your dad, though, if you could talk to your dad right now?
I love him.
You miss him, right?
And you miss him, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the most important message you could give him. Before we go, let's talk to the elder statesman of the youth group here. This is James. He was your uncle. What kind of uncle was your dad? Was your uncle?
Yeah, Uncle Vinny was great. You know, he always took us to Yankee games, and he was always there when you needed him. He was the greatest person. He would do anything for anybody at any time. And it's hard with Adam because, as my mother said, we're such a close family, and now that he's gone, it's hard to just try to move on with Adam. But I mean, we see him and his 4 boys, and it brings me comfort when I see them, because I see Uncle Vinny in them.
And Pat, you were telling me that just last month they found the remains of your brother.
Yeah.
Did you have a funeral?
Yes, we did. We had a mass. We had a memorial service back in October, and we had a mass, full church. Everybody came to the mass. It was a beautiful tribute to my brother at church, and it was very hard because that was reality when we buried him. So it's been a tough month for all of us, a very tough month, as well as a very hard year.
I'm very grateful that you talked to us on CNN.
I thank you.
We wish you all the best. And one thing we want to mention about this is a lifetime of heartache for family members who lost loved ones in the World Trade Center. We hope that today's service provides some comfort for the people who did end up coming here today. Paula, back to you.
Gary, I had the opportunity to spend some time with a couple of the families last week who actually ventured out to the Statue of Liberty to look back in the city and remember family members they had lost. And the one thing they said to me was that they didn't think the rest of America really understood that there was no such thing as closure, that their pain is not fleeting, that they endured around the clock. And I'm just wondering, hang on one second.
This is on the large part of your screen, on the right part of the screen. This is a ceremony, a service, if you will. Why don't we take it full, if you guys don't mind? A service going on at the firehouse in Chelsea. Chelsea's in Lower Manhattan. There has been bunting around the firehouse, and at some point today that will come down, and the flag at the firehouse will be raised to full mast or full staff. I always confuse the two. Thank you.
Depends on whether it's one's at ground and one's at sea.
There we go. This is the kind of thing, let me talk gently here. Just take this in for a moment. This firehouse lost, as memory serves me, 5 members. There are few firehouses in New York that lost none. Each of them today will wish for tomorrow. We said a little earlier that, and this is probably true in other cities too, that firefighters in New York City, it's a family business in many ways, that fathers and sons, grandfathers have all joined the department. It was long considered the Irish family business here in New York. But it is a family within the firehouse as well. And they have suffered such an extraordinary loss. It is truly indescribable. We see the flag now at full staff.
And as they live through this loss, there are still so many questions being raised about whether the city could have done more to make these firefighters safer that day. Surveys have shown that the radio operations and communication systems weren't what they were supposed to have been that day. They were making a switch from an analog to a digital system, and that left many of these firefighters unable to communicate with their superiors.
Well, I think there are, and there ought to be, many investigations to go on in many different places as to how things might have turned out differently. But one of the absolute truths of this tragedy is that firefighters did what firefighters do, is that they ran towards danger to save other people. And it may turn out that had the communication systems been better and the rest, the number would have been something other than 343. But you can't take the danger out of the firefighting business, and you, as it turns out, can't take the heroism out of the firefighter either. All the best equipment and the best command be damned in that case. It's a dangerous, tricky business. And when the worst thing happens, and the worst thing happened, this is where we end up.
But I think where the bitterness really came in was the days following the tragedy, where these guys needed respiratory equipment that just wasn't capable of being brought in. We go down to the New York Stock Exchange. Christine Romans is standing by. I believe we might be in our moment of silence here. A delayed opening today of the New York Stock Exchange.
Stock Exchange was closed for a week. It was the Stock Exchange, for those of you who aren't familiar, perhaps there are a few of you, is located in Lower Manhattan. New York Stock Exchange is located in Lower Manhattan, and so in many cases it was literally impossible to get there. Remember being in a hotel in those first few weeks, and Merrill Lynch had set up offices in that hotel, which is 30, 40, 50 blocks away. But in any case, the Stock Exchange stayed closed, and then when it opened, it was not a very pleasant day for the stock market.
Oh, we remember that. It's a very powerful lineup you have at the podium today. When we get that shot again, you'll see the head of the SEC, Governor of New York, current Mayor of New York, former Mayor of New York.
The Stock Exchange is an important part of the city and the business of the Stock Exchange. We don't mean to sound crass by talking about money on a day like today, but the fact is that one of the things that the terrorists tried to do was attack a great symbol of American capitalism, and we suspect there is no greater symbol than the Stock Exchange.
By the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed, at the twilight last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the